Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette 182, where we read and review and react to philosophy live. First time reading it, and you just see what's going on. So, I was just perusing some of the stuff on recent things from the Australasian Journal of Philosophy, and it's funny, like I have this script hooked up to do a little page counts, but it looked like it's having a lot of trouble. See, this one is 1 to 11 right here. This one's 1 to 15, this one's 1 to 5, this one's 1 to 4, and then this one right here is 1 to 15, 1 to 14. And even though it'll get the 1 to 15 sometimes, it's not doing the 1 to 14. I don't understand why that is. So maybe I've been missing some papers, but since I'm here, might as well read a paper. So let's go with the, 1 to 4 wins. We got race, sex, gender, and so is 1 to 5. So let's see if either of these are here. And I basically didn't get enough sleep last night, so I have no idea if I'm any smart at this point. That's right, any smart. That's what I said. I'm going to stick by it. Hopefully these will be available. Don't know. And it doesn't even matter if I can... the reviews. If I can't read any of them, it doesn't make any difference anyway. 1 to 6, a reply. Why not? See, these 1 to 15s, I should be marking that off. 1 to 1, I guess that's something else. The Stoics on Let Cut All There Is to Say. Maybe a review or something. Yeah, but there's all these papers I could have read and I hadn't even spotted them. And yeah, this is the, that was probably a book. Wait, did she write the book or did she write the review? Because I've met Katya in New York before. Let's just take a second look. Yeah, so this is, by Ada Vanalsky, and Katya merely wrote a review. Okay, that's fine. So, see if we can find any other, reasonably short papers, just so I don't lose my mind today. This is 1 to 11. That's slightly less terrible than a 1 to 20. 1 to 14. Who's your ideal listener? Did I do this one? I might have. Maybe my script is funky today, because I think I might have looked at this one before. Yeah, I think I did read that one. I also have this paper from here from a few days ago that's available, so it's, if I can't find anything else, I will just default to that one. Looks like I've clicked on it before. And is it... Why am I... Oh, look at that. 1 to 12. I can handle a 1 to 12. Did I read this? I can't believe I would have read this already. Yeah. I mean, 1 to 12, but it's a very wide page. Maybe I ran away from it after seeing how much I'd have to read. But that's the leading contender at the moment, that or the other one. The Paradox of Jewish... Yeah, I definitely read this paper. Paradox of Jewish What's Up. That was a nice paper. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, see, I'm looking for my... I have to, reload this again. Maybe that's the problem, because it didn't load correctly. See, I got all these exclamation points up here and none down below, and I don't understand why. Huh, now I've got no exclamation points. Yep. So strange. Okay. I read this. The other day it was 1 to 14. So let's see. We've got well-being counterfactualist accounts of harm and benefit. Why not? Why waste any more time looking for something to read? Okay. And I'll get halfway through it and realize I already read it because I've done that more than once. Because that's just how we roll here. Okay, so let's see. So, we've got well-being counterfactualist accounts of harm and benefit. Let me just throw this in the chat for anyone who wants it. So, if you happen to come by chat, you can always type !point paper, and the paper I'm reading will pop up in the chat again, or you can just grab it if you're there now. Please feel free to ask any questions you want. This is my first time reading it too, and so your guess is probably better than mine. Hello, Adian. What's up? Hello, hello. I'm reading some philosophy and trying to figure out what's going on. So, here we go. Suppose that, and feel free to ask questions along the way if you would like. Suppose that for every possible event E and person S who would exist whether or not E were to occur, there is a well-being level. Ooh, okay, so we're talking about the well-being of people here. There's a well-being level WSE such that S would occupy the well-being level of SE if E were to occur, and the well-being level of S minus E such that S would occupy if WS minus E if E were not to occur. So we've got well-being levels, then you've got your well-being if it occurs here, and the well-being minus is over here, and they're not the same. So if the event occurs. So we're doing a little bit of formulas on well-beingness. Okay, are facts about such connections between events and well-being levels always sufficient to determine whether a particular event would harm or benefit a particular person? Let us call an account of harm and benefit well-being counterfactualist, if and only if it answers this question affirmatively. Many seemingly attractive accounts of harm and benefit are well-being counterfactualist in this sense. However, proceeding by first discussing a very simple well-being counterfactualist account, and then moving on to progressively more complex accounts, we will arrive at the conclusion that no such account is acceptable. Okay, so they're arguing that if you think you can sort of figure out how you'd feel about your well-being given an event, or on the other hand, if the event didn't occur, then they're saying that you can't do that. That's no account is acceptable of trying to figure out how you would have felt if there were indifferent events. So I guess you could argue that how the events could possibly affect how you feel about things, so if it changes you in some way. I am not a philosophy professor. I am just a nutcase who reads way too much philosophy. And I read and review. I'm not completely terrible at it. I shouldn't downplay myself too much. But yeah, I do just read academic philosophy papers and try to figure out what's going on to varying degrees of success. Okay, continuing, and feel free to continue asking questions too. According to the most widely held and discussed account of harm and benefit, often called counterfactual comparative account, CCA, an event harms or benefits a person just in case her well-being level would be higher or lower if the event had not occurred. Since CCA is well-being counterfactualist, it is among the targets of our criticism. While there are some prominent objections to CCA in the literature, it is controversial how compelling these are. Our rejection of CCA, however, is mainly based on considerations that have not previously been fully articulated. If our general conclusion is correct, certain initial attractive ways of modifying CCA are doomed to fail as well. 2. Preliminary notes. We are interested in accounts of overall rather than pro tanto harm and benefit. While an event might be both pro tanto harmful and pro tanto beneficial to a person, and might be both harmful and overall harmful beneficial and pro tanto beneficial harmful to a person, we shall assume that no event is both overall harmful and overall beneficial to the one and the same person. I'm okay. I'm a philosophy and politics student. I'd like to get into reading papers like this in my spare time, though. Yeah, I suggest you don't do like I do. I mean, I pick random papers. That's why it's philosophy roulette. But, I mean, there's always a ton of papers in your area that you're never going to get to. So, I mean, just jump on. I mean, I start off on fill papers. You can always go to a section, anything you're interested in, and see what's going on. So, yeah, sure. Read more, see what's going on in the area. At least that's what's getting published. And even if you don't think it's good, you can know that's what's getting published. So you at least get that benefit out of it. Yeah. I've read some stuff here I don't think is great, but I'm like, okay, this is what people are publishing now, so that's what people think is great. And I at least understand something out of that. Oh yeah, that's absolutely the case, Adian. I mean, you can never, it's almost always a survey. That's all you're going to get, during a semester. You're just trying to bowl through material, and you get whatever the professor or whatever you're reading, that survey that you're, and I'm sure it's good, but you can't go through all the stuff, and you're not going to get random stuff too. So it's just the nature of the beast. There's always the nature of current academia is that so much is getting published, and there's not enough time to read it all. Sometimes a distinction is made between intrinsic and extrinsic harm. See, for instance, Bradley and Clockseam. An event is intrinsically harmful to the extent that it is harmful because of its intrinsic properties. An event is extrinsically harmful to the extent that it is harmful because of its extrinsic properties. In particular, those that concern its relation to other events, such as its effects. A corresponding distinction can be made regarding benefit. We shall understand overall harm and benefit as including both intrinsic and extrinsic harm and benefit. Thus, an event might be intrinsically harmful, beneficial, but be overall beneficial or harmful due to its extrinsic properties. Similarly, an event might be extrinsically harmful or beneficial, but overall beneficial or harmful because of its intrinsic properties. Now, we have to see where they're going with this last setup. According to most advocates of well-being, counterfactualist accounts, what determines overall harm and benefit are the lifetime well-being levels to which the relevant events would give rise. An alternative view appeals instead to the well-being level that the person would have after each relevant event. Yet further alternatives are possible. While we shall adopt the lifetime conception in our formulations of specific well-being counterfactualist accounts, nothing in our discussion hinges on this. This is not a review article. I pick random stuff. I mean, this paper here is, let me switch over real quick. This is in the Australasian Journal of Philosophy, and this isn't a review article. This is just a straight up research article, in the journal. Yeah, it's open access, so easy to grab a hold of. So no, this is, not a review. This is just straight up, paper in this area. Mostly what I mean, I actually try to avoid reviews because I won't know enough of the background material. Granted, I normally don't know enough about the background material, but if they're talking about too many other things that other people said, then it's just me reporting on the reporting. So I usually try to find something that I can sink my teeth into. So I read papers like this sometimes, and I also sometimes I'll pick out things I think are interesting to read. Recently I read some aphorisms, and I thought that was a good format, actually, because you don't have to pay so much attention to every aphorism. Okay, continuing. We shall make no particular suppositions about the components of well-being, for example, whether they're episodes of pleasure or desire satisfactions, etc. As is customary in the debate, however, we presuppose that well-being is intrapersonally measurable on at least an interval scale. Don't even know what that means. That well-being is intrapersonally measurable on at least an interval scale. But okay, we'll find out what happens here. 3. Absolutism. We will make the probably unrealistic but simplifying assumption that every possible event counterfactually determines a lifetime well-being level for every person who would exist if the event were to occur. Thus, assumption 1. For any possible event E and person S who would exist if E were to occur, there is a lifetime well-being level W sub SE such that S would occupy WSE if E were to occur. So I guess given any event, this is where you're going to end up in terms of your well-being. Like something happens and this is where you're going to be in terms of your entire life. Whatever. So it's a big assumption, but they know that. This assumption follows from, but does not entail, the thesis of counterfactual determinism, according to which, so it follows from the determinism, okay, according to which, for every possible event E, there is a unique possible world W such that if E were to occur, then W would obtain. Yeah, makes sense. A very simple well-being counterfactualist theory of harm and benefit is the following. Absolutism. There is a lifetime well-being level W such that for any possible event E and person S, E would harm S if and only if W is bigger than W given the event, and E would benefit would harm him if your non-event state was well-being is better than if it occurs, and you would benefit if it occurs and it's better than the non-occurrence or something else. The lifetime Oh, okay. So, given the event, then your overall lifetime is better off. Okie dokie. Absolutism can be quickly dismissed. For any actual occurring event E and any actual person S, WSE is identical to S's actual lifetime well-being level. Hence, absolutism implies that every person with an actual lifetime well-being level below W is harmed by every actual event, and that every person with an actual lifetime well-being level above W is benefited by every actual event. This implication is unacceptable for two interrelated reasons. First, even a life that is very good for the person living it may surely contain some events that harm her. Similarly, even if a life is very bad for a person, it may surely contain some events that benefit her. Second, let us call an event that neither harms nor benefits a person S neutral for S. It is clear that for any actual person, a great many actual events are neutral for her. Consider, for instance, a microphysical event occurring today in a star millions of light years from Earth. It is evident, we take it, that such an event is neutral for every currently living human being. Yeah, so this is basically, I guess, okay, they're going to go into it, but this is just too involved. Like every event anywhere, whatever you consider an event to be, that has some sort of outcome on your well-being, which is kind of ridiculous. As they say, if something happens in a galaxy that is like outside of our light cone, just like too far away to ever affect us, then like it can't possibly matter. Absolutism thus violates the following adequacy condition for theory of harm and benefit. Adequacy condition 1. For any lifetime well-being of level W, a person S's occupying W is compatible with there being an actual event of each of these three categories: harmful for S, beneficial for S, and neutral for S. Adequacy condition 1 implies that absolutism states neither necessary nor sufficient conditions for harm and benefit. Yeah, so if things are just, this is overbearing, and absolutism is overbearing. Too much goes into every event. The counterfactual comparative account. The failure of absolutism shows that there is no universal baseline well-being level that, for any possible event E and person S, determines whether E harms or benefits S. The antithesis to absolutism is extreme relativism concerning baselines, positing an individual baseline for each E and S. A natural idea is to let the baseline be the lifetime well-being level that S would occupy if E were not to occur. Let us thus make the following assumption. Assumption 2. For any possible event E and person S who would exist if E were not to occur, there is a lifetime well-being WS minus E, such S would occupy WS minus E if E were not to occur. So isn't this just a negation of the absolutism? We'll see. A clarificatory comment is needed. WS minus E is assumed to be S's lifetime well-being level in the non-E world, that is nearest as seen from the nearest E world, rather than as seen from the actual world. These worlds might be different if the actual world is a non-E world. Yeah, that makes sense. If you're saying, well, this world doesn't have it, it doesn't specify anything else about the world, you have to say it's the exact same world as the world with E, except it is everything possibly as close to that world without that one event. But we actually have no idea what that kind of world would look like. That's us making up stories, but still, this is sort of, you need to say it's everything but that event if that is even possible. Okay, the counterfactual comparative account, CCA. For any possible event E and person S, E would harm as if and only if, given S not E happening is better than E happening, and E would benefit S if the E happening is great well-being. The well-being given E is greater than the well-being given not E for the person S. CCA is the most widely held and discussed theory of harm and benefit. The theory is simple, elegant, and fulfills adequacy condition 1, since E comes out neutral if the event well-being is equal to the event well-being and the non-event well-being. But CCA also faces notorious difficulties. One is known as the preemption problem. Preemption problem. I read about this before. Suppose that Jill hits Jack with her fist, breaking his nose. Had Jill not hit Jack with her fist, she would instead have hit him with a baseball bat. This would have injured Jack even more and would have resulted in a lower lifetime well-being level for him. In this case of what appears to be a preemptive harm, CCA implies that Jill hitting Jack with her fist fist benefits him. Many would find this conclusion plainly false. On the contrary, they would claim Jill's action harms Jack. There are also cases of what is seemingly preemptive benefit. Suppose that Mary invites Mike to a party, which she enjoys very much. Had Mary not invited Mike to the party, however, she would have instead invited him to a concert, which she would have enjoyed even more. His lifetime well-being level would, as a result, have been higher. CCA implies that Mary's inviting Mike to the party harms him. Many would find it obvious that it does not. Rather, they would maintain it benefits him. However, it is controversial whether the preemption problem does in fact establish a falsity of CCA. We are inclined to think that it does, but instead of relying on this claim, we shall present another argument against CCA. To begin with, we shall argue that for every possible choice situation, there is a set of possible actions that constitute the options for the agent in that situation. Assumption 3. For any possible choice situation, CS, there is a finite set, OCS, of mutually exclusive and jointly exhaustive possible actions that are performable by the agent S in CS. Call such a set an option set. Okay, I have a little bit of a philosophical thing here. This sort of exhaustive possibility issue. How do we know that we have a exhaustive possibilities? I mean, in the real world, you can always do something differently, or you might be able to do something differently. I don't know. I mean, but the fact that we can have a closed-world assumption that these are all the options, that is a sort of a background assumption just to these sorts of arguments. And so it's not like I have is a big sort of a concern I always have in the background when we're making this style of argument. It may not matter for these authors, that assumption, but still, it is something that I worry about when I'm reading arguments of this form. Okay, continuing. The performable actions are those that the agent can perform in the sense at issue in the principle that ought implies can. It is commonly assumed, for example in standard formulations of consequentialism and other ethical theories, that there is a set of such actions. While there might be some situations in which the agent could not have done anything other than what she did, and so situations in which OCS had only one member, we take it that OCS typically has at least two members. Yeah, and this is why it's just a big assumption in the background. It's usually assumed that there's a few different options at least, and it doesn't always matter that those are all the options. It just means that there's more than one. Using the concept of an option set, we can formulate the following very plausible adequacy condition for theories of harm and benefit. Adequacy condition 2. Let possible actions A and A star be members of the same option set, OCS. If the well-being of A given S is much higher than the well-being of A given A star of S, the well-being of S given A star, and there is no other relevant difference between A and A star, then A would harm S only if A star would harm S, and A star would benefit S only if A would benefit S. Adequacy condition 2 does not require for its plausibility the much higher rather than merely higher clause. It is still worth including this clause as it makes adequacy condition 2, as well as our arguments below, even more difficult to resist. Okay, so we've got like just sort of a one's better than the other, but then that doesn't make the other one bad. So you can have higher well-being, but you're still having good well-being, but there's still like higher well-being now. So you've got A and A star. Again, this going to the same concern I just raised up here. There's a continuity question, like is this like a full gradient between A and A star? Are these sort of intervals like A and then it jumps to A star? I don't know. Like depending on the style of argument, you do have to be concerned with sort of the background logic of these variables here. Okay, maybe they're even going to cover that. Yeah, I drink beer, I drink some wine sometimes, and sometimes I do it completely sober, and I am definitely smarter than. That there are no other relevant differences between A and A star here is stipulated to mean that A and A star do not differ with regard to factors such as causation, rights violations, the agent's motives or intentions, or other factors that opponents of well-being counterfactualist accounts have sometimes held to be relevant to harm and benefit. All these people say this. Without this ceteris paribus clause, adequacy condition 2 might be rejected, although not by well-being counterfactualists, on, for instance, the ground that even if the well-being of S given A is much higher than the well-being of S given A star, and A star would not harm S, it can still be true that A would harm S so long as A, but not A star, would cause S to occupy the relevant well-being level. Okay, so this is just talking about a question of a degree. So if A is way better than A star, then maybe you could claim that A star does kind of harm A, given that A star harms S, given that A was so much better. With the ceteris paribus clause in place, however, adequacy condition 2 is eminently plausible. What it states, less formally, is simply that in a given situation, a harmful action cannot leave the person much better off than a harmless action, and a beneficial action cannot leave the person much worse off than a non-beneficial action, assuming again that there are no other relevant differences between the respective actions. This strikes us as a platitude that also helps to explain the idea that harm is prudentially relevant. It is hard to see how we could have prudential reasons to avoid harmful actions and to choose beneficial ones if this principle were false, since the harmful actions could in that case leave us at much higher well-being levels than the beneficial ones, even if there are no other relevant differences between them. The problem for CCA is that it is incompatible with adequacy condition 2. Suppose that Beth has the following 4 options: to visit a fantastic resort, to visit a moderately nice resort, to visit a terrible resort, or to voluntarily go to prison where she would be confined for life. So that'd be a government resort. The resulting lifetime well-being levels for Beth are ordered accordingly, with very large differences between them. As seen from the nearest possible world, where Beth goes to the moderately nice resort, the nearest world where she does not do so is one where she goes to the extremely nice resort. As seen from the nearest world where she goes to the terrible resort, the nearest world where she does not do so is one where she goes to prison. While going to the terrible resort is an option for Beth, she would not perform that action unless she had lost her preference for pleasurable experiences, in which case she might just as well go to prison. Under these assumptions, CCA implies that Beth's going to the moderately nice resort would harm her, while going to the terrible resort would benefit her. This result is problematic. For since Beth's lifetime well-being level would be much higher if she went to the moderately nice resort than if she went to the terrible resort, and there are no other relevant differences between these actions, adequacy condition 2 requires that the former action would harm her only if the latter action would harm her. This is incompatible with CCA. Okay, so what's going on here is that we've got like sort of a we're chaining together different sorts of well-beings. So if one, it's a I've run into this a few times now in this sort of area, that if you have preferences that look like they like X is bigger than Y, Y is bigger than Z, and therefore X is bigger than Z, then you have to be able to I'm blanking on the word, but they follow like across the chain. Now, if you start mixing things up with more than like 3 things, so if this one's bigger than this one and this one's bigger than this one, then if you start like moving things around, you can start to get the chain to not go exactly where you think it's going to go, because you can have different sorts of loops between the different options. A might be better than B, and B might be better than C, but then C might be more preferable than A. Like some people like chocolate more than crackers, some people like crackers more than ice cream, and so do you like chocolate more than ice cream? Not necessarily. So that's the sort of thing going on here. So if you've got different resorts and one's better than the other, maybe your well-being levels are subject to this sort of multiple epicycle issue where you just looping around. Well, I'm happy you follow. Sometimes other people are watching this and they're like, what is going on? Get some weird comments sometimes. Okay, so it is important to note that our objection is not that CCA faces both the preemptive Yeah, well, I only understand somewhat too. Faces both the preemptive harm problem and the preemptive benefit problem in one and the same case. A preemptive harm objective to CCA based on the present case would claim that the going to the moderately nice resort would not harm Beth, contrary to CCA, and a preemptive benefit objection would claim that going to the terrible resort would not benefit her, contrary to CCA. Our objection assumes neither of these claims. Still, less of course does it assume their conjunction. Well, this is basically philosophy, so you never use those logic classroom. I don't know if this really counts as outside the classroom. This is still reading academic philosophy. Although I will say, it does help sometimes. Definitely depending what you're doing. I do a little programming that's basically logic homework, and you get paid for it. Our objection assumes neither of these claims, still less, of course, does it assume their conjunction. Our objection is instead that still going to the moderately nice resort would leave Beth much better off than going to the terrible resort, and these actions belong to the same option set, and there are no other relevant differences between them. It cannot be both that going to the moderately nice resort would harm Beth and that going to the terrible resort would not harm her. In other words, our objection is that CCA violates adequacy condition 2. Again, we are inclined to think that the preemptive harm and preemptive benefit problems are serious, but the present objection is independent of them. As indicated above, the fact that CCA violates adequacy condition 2 also means that it has implausible normative consequences. It seems that we always have at least some prudential reason to choose beneficial actions rather than harmful ones. This is captured by the following principle. Reason for action. Actually, I want to make one other comment before I get to the reason for action. There is a question of the way you're grouping your items. So we've got 4 items here. We've got the government resort, we've got the terrible resort, we've got the nice one, and then the very nice one. So you've got these 4 together, 4 of them, and then you're grouping these 2 and these 2 together, and then you're comparing the good one and the bad one. Yeah, that's exactly who you get in logic courses. So you're grouping things together. You got 4 things, and you're grouping 2 of them together, and then you're making judgments on those 2 things, and then you're taking the judgments and applying them to the next one, or the other set. And that's kind of what's happening. But the question I also have is, if you're going to start grouping things together, sometimes it's very clever what you're doing, you're grouping together, but sometimes you're building assumptions too. So you have to be careful when you start grouping things this way. And usually in a paper like this, these people are very smart. They've set things up to work for them, and so the way they've grouped it obviously played out the way they wanted it to. And so I don't have a serious objection here. It's just something to note in how the problem was set up, and maybe that's something to look at, is how things were grouped and how that benefits this argument or maybe doesn't benefit other people's argument. Something to look at. Okay, back to the paper. Reason for action. Let possible actions A and A star be members of the same option set OCS. If A would benefit S and A star would harm S, then S has a prudential reason to do A rather than A star. Reason for action is highly plausible. In fact, we are inclined to accept an even stronger principle to the effect that the reason to choose A rather than A star will always be prudentially decisive. Here, however, we assume that only the weaker principle that there will exist such a reason, which need not be decisive. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Depends on how you have a theory for action. But anyway. But CCA and reason for action together imply that Beth has a prudential reason to go to the terrible resort rather than to the moderately nice resort. Yeah, depending on how you're looking at it, and that is false. Beth has no prudential reason whatsoever to go to the terrible resort rather than to the moderately nice one. See, that's only when comparing the terrible resort to the government resort, jail. And so it seems like you have to have some sort of way to have different sorts of rankings, and then that's what I mean when you've got these 2 here and these 2 here. How do you rank these different things differently? Okay. A further problem for CCA is worth noting. Consider again the case with which we introduced the preemptive harm problem, where Jill hits Jack with her fist. Again, CCA implies that Jill's hitting Jack with her fist benefits him, given that she would otherwise have hit him with the baseball bat. supposing that Jill would have been even better off if Jill had not only moved her body at all, and hence not hit Jack. CCA also implies that Jill's moving her body harms him. The upshot is that Jill's hitting Jack with her fists benefit him, while moving her body harms him is odd. Intuitively, it is the other way around. The hitting seems harmful, whereas the moving appears harmless. For example, we might appropriately blame Jill for hitting Jack with her fist, but blame her for moving her body seems inappropriate. Alright, so I don't know if you are a Simpsons fan, but there's a classic episode of The Simpsons where Lisa and Bart say, look, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to move in this direction. And they start swinging their arms. And that's Bart. And Lisa says, I'm not going to do anything else, but I'm going to start kicking in the air right in front of me. And they start moving together. It says, if you get in my way, that's your own fault, but I'm not paying any attention. And that's how they start the fight. But I mean, obviously that's a very silly example, sort of hilarious. But like, it makes sense that it's not the motion in some sense, it's the hitting. Again, this is a way of how are you breaking up the problem. And that's kind of what's going on here. How are we slicing up what's going on? Okay, modifying CCA. Having found strong reason to reject CCA as well as absolutism, let's consider well-being counterfactualist theories. Feel free to steal anything you like from me. That's fine by me. Let us consider well-being counterfactualist theories that try to strike the right balance between those two extreme concerning baselines. It might be thought that some relatively straightforward modification of CCA could achieve this. A possible lesson to draw from the problems with CCA is that the relevant comparison for determining whether an event E would harm or benefit a person S is not what would happen to S if event E were to occur or not to occur, but rather what could happen. In order to capture this idea, let us make the following assumption. All right, so they're going modal now all of a sudden. So what could happen? So what possibly might be going on? Assumption 4. For any possible event E, there is a finite set A of mutually exclusive and jointly exhaustive possible events that include E and its relevant alternatives. Call such a set an alternative set. All right, so we got like maybe possible worlds or possible states of a world that we're going to call an alternative set. We shall also assume that every option set is a proper or improper subset of an alternative set. The relevant alternatives to E are the events that could have happened instead of E. If a coin is tossed, for example, the possible event that it lands heads is plausible and perhaps the only alternative to the possible event that it lands tails. In other cases, we might not always have a clear intuitive idea of how events should be sorted into alternative sets, in particular concerning possible events that are not actions. But this does not matter for our purposes. We shall eventually argue that no well-being counterfactualist account is acceptable, and our argument does not rely on any particular assumptions about alternative sets. We can therefore simply assume that there is some way for adherents of well-being counterfactualist accounts to sort events into alternative sets. Okay. We shall now discuss some modifications of CCA for each alternative set A and person S identify a baseline WSA and can claim that an event E in A would harm S if the well-being of S given A is greater than the well-being of S given E, and would benefit S if E happens, E happening is better than A happening. One such account identifies WSA with the maximum lifetime well-being level for S of the events in A. Let's call this theory the best alternative account. Restricted to harm rather than benefit and to actions rather than events in general, an account very similar to the best alternative account has been proposed by Melinda Roberts. Unlike CCA, the best alternative account satisfies adequacy condition 2. Problematically, however, the account implies that every alternative except the best ones, in terms of how well off the respective events would leave S, would harm S. As a result, it fares even worse than CCA with respect to preemptive benefit problem. Well, that's weird, I mean, it seems like if you're going to have what counts as the best alternatives, I mean, depending on how liberal you are with your understanding of what counts as best, then maybe this is really not such a bad thing. That it is the best ones that are the ones that are acceptable. I will grant, though, that maybe making that what counts as best there is an ad hoc claim, and so there's still work to be done to sort what you mean by best and not best, but it might just be a semantic issue of what somebody means by best, and maybe Melinda Roberts can then just clarify the notion of best under consideration in this alternative account, best alternative account theory. So I'm not entirely, this seems like, well, I don't know the background, so it seems a little quick right there. Okay. Another problem with the best alternative account is that it appears arbitrary. Hey, this is exactly what I said. Woo! It appears arbitrary as a general account of harm and benefit. Why not claim instead that only the worst event is in an alternative set in terms of how well off the respective event would leave S would be harmful? That is, why not let WSA be the minimum lifetime well-being level for S of the events in A? The resulting theory, the worst alternative account, will not in general yield intuitively less plausible results than the best alternative account does. In situations where all or most alternatives are good, intuitively speaking, the worst alternative account will appear more plausible, whereas the best alternative account will seem more plausible in situations where all or most alternatives are intuitively bad. Alternatives intuitively are bad. The worst alternative account fares very poorly with respect to the preemptive hard problem. Okay, yeah, so there's more than one way to slice it up. Again, this doesn't seem like particularly killer. Like, you might be able to draw this line a little bit better depending on how much effort you put in. But yeah, I agree that there is a question of arbitrariness, exactly, which I had barely just sort of scraped above. Okay. Further, the best and worst alternative accounts both violate adequacy condition 1 if construed as accounts of both harm and benefit. The best alternative account absurdly excludes the possibility that an event benefits a person. This can be fixed by weakening the theory's conditions for benefit as follows. E benefits S if and only if the well-being of S given E is greater than or equal to the well-being of S given all the alternatives. Similarly, the worst alternative account excludes the possibility that an event is harmful. To fix this, we may weaken the theory's condition to state that same thing, except for it's the other way around. Thus revised, however, both theories imply that every event is either harmful or beneficial, hence they still violate adequacy condition 1 by excluding the possibility of neutral events. Well, I don't know, because there's a equality here, and maybe everything that is equal would fall under the equality condition. That would all be the neutral stuff. So I'm not sure, because it depends on how you slice up the equality. If there's a lot of things that turn out to both satisfy both of these equations, that would be this one and this one, then there'd be a lot of things that were both A and D were equal, and then you'd just define that as neutral. So there might be some duck out right here. But yeah, I mean, this style of argumentation here, they're not trying to kill the argument in one, like, big blow. This is like three sort of like glancing blows that they're showing that it's shaky. So this style of argument that's going on here, because this best alternative account does seem very good or reasonably plausible. And so what they're doing is they obviously like it, but what they're doing is they're sort of just destabilizing it in like these paragraphs here. So like this one here, and then like this one down here. This is all like destabilization, and that's how they're sort of weakening the theory to show that it needs help, which is what I expect to come up shortly. We're coming to the end of the paper too. Okay, so continuing. Well-being counterfactualists must thus continue their search for a better version. In particular, they need an account that, unlike absolutism, CCA, the best alternative account, and the worst alternative account, satisfies both adequacy conditions 1 and 2. One such account, which naturally comes to mind, is the average account, defined by letting W sub A be the average lifetime well-being level for S of the events in A. Why would anyone think that? Maybe someone else would think that. I don't see how averaging anything works in these sorts of areas, but okay. Despite having the important advantage of satisfying adequacy conditions 1 and 2, however, the average account is hardly a satisfactory theory. Suppose that A is equal to the set E equal Gary's just saying hello to Grace, E star Gary's insulting Grace, E double star Gary's accusing Grace of murder, is an alternative set, and that E star is what actually happened. So Gary insults Grace. Since the events in A are actions, A is also plausibly an option set. Suppose that also that WGE equals 10, WGE star is equal to 8, and WGE double star is equal 3, with the subscript G standing for grace. Since the average of these values is 7, the average account implies that E star benefits Grace. Intuitively, however, Gary's insulting Grace harms her. Note, moreover, that... Alright, I just want to stop because these things drive me nuts. I severely dislike, and it's nothing on these authors in particular, philosophers assigning numbers to formulas. I just don't think we have any idea what it means to have a well-being of 3, a well-being of 8, or a well-being of 10. I don't understand how we can assign numbers like that to well-being. Could I assign a well-being of 4,387,677,324 to my well-being? I mean, it just seems sort of very strange to do that. And so I don't see why that one's strange and then this one is okay, where we got 8, 10, and 3, and with an average of 7. I mean, where did these numbers come from? Why are they like this? I don't know. Okay, enough of my rant. And it's nothing against these authors in particular. This is widespread. It's a widespread gripe I have. Okay, and again, this is also the grouping problem, because we've got two things here that are inherently, we're grouping two things that are bad for Grace with one thing that would be, I guess, neutral for Grace, just saying hello. And so if you would group them differently, things would come off differently. And so it feels a little bit like the setup here is, well, they're trying to demonstrate something in their argument, but it seems like their setup is biased in one direction, which is actually not that bad here, but still. Okay, continuing. Note, moreover, that the average account implies that E star benefits Grace also if we had the assumption that if Gary had not insulted Grace, he would have just said hello to her. Thus, E star comes out as beneficial, although it is intuitively harmful, and Grace would have been better off had it not occurred. Hence, the average account arguably fares even worse in this case than CCA does in preemptive harm cases. Any intuitively harmful event that is deemed beneficial by CCA is such that the subject of the putative harm would have been even worse off if the event had not occurred. Hence, there is at least some support for the claim that the event is not harmful. As regards to Gary's insulting Grace, on the other hand, there seems to be nothing that tells against its being harmful. The mere fact that Gary has an option that would be even worse for Grace does not appear relevant. Yeah, again, see, this is how we're slicing up the world. Why are these the relevant options? Why are only these 3 the things that could happen, and why are they valued in this way? I don't know. It just seems to be something we do nowadays. Okay. Our general argument against well-being counterfactualist accounts. Having rejected absolutism, CCA, the best alternative account, the worst alternative account, and the average account, the prospects for finding an acceptable well-being counterfactualist theory of harm and benefit are beginning to look bleak. In fact, we believe that no well-being counterfactualist account will succeed, and we shall now outline an argument to that effect. Order the events in an alternative set A from best to worst, with respect to how well off they would leave a given person S. In the case of ties, any order will do. Let the difference profile for S of A DSA be the ordered set of differences in well-being levels for S between the event in A thus ordered. If A has n elements, DSA has n-1 elements. For example, if A equals E1, E2, E3, and the well-beings are as such, and then DSA is given by the interval 2, 4. Let difference profile. So you can be between 2 and 4, the difference profile. So 7 minus 5 is 2, and I guess 5 minus 1 is 4. So that's what this is. Okay. Let pure comparativism be the view that whether an event E would be harmful, neutral, or beneficial for S is determined solely by the difference profile for S of the alternative set containing E. We shall first argue that no version of pure comparativism is acceptable, and then try to show that bringing in absolute well-being levels is of no avail. Let's start by noting that no difference profile DSA can reasonably be claimed to rule out the best event in A with regard to how well off it would leave S would be beneficial to S. Clearly, the best events being beneficial is compatible with any facts about the differences between this event and other events. Remember that DSA includes no information about the absolute well-being levels. Yeah, it's only the difference between options. Similarly, no difference profile rules out the worst event in A with regard to how well off it would leave S would be harmful to S. Differently put, for any difference profile S, there is a possible alternative set with this profile such that the best or worst event for S in the sense would be beneficial or harmful to S. The only way for a purely comparativist account to accommodate these claims is to assume that the best event in an alternative set is always beneficial and that the worst event is always harmful. Okay, so yeah, basically, if you're doing something relative because it's a comparativist account, you're only comparing things, and then there is no harmful or beneficial. Only one is better than the other in some other way of understanding it. Since there can be more than two events in an alternative set, the difference profile must, according to pure comparativism, determine the status of alternatives lying between the best and the worst. What about E2 in the case above, for instance? Since E2 lies closer to the best alternative E1 than to the worst E3, it might seem natural to conclude that E2 would be beneficial. If so, it must hold for all alternative sets with the difference profile 2-4 that the middle alternative would be beneficial. Now, you see this? I can't even... This is why I was complaining about harping on the numbers before. It might seem that natural E2 would be beneficial. It seems not at all intuitive to me that this... I have no intuitions on this at all. It does not seem natural at all. What is the meaning of natural here? I have no concept of that. The idea that there's like a naturalness to an arbitrary comparative ordering... I don't see why. If you arbitrarily assume that the one at the top is best, it says nothing about the rest of them. No, I understand why people might say that. Look, we've got a big list, and 100 is good for you, and so 99 is probably good for you too. Maybe put the cutoff at 90 where it stops being good for you, but the one that's like 1% off, it's still good for you. But that's assuming that's like a percentage. This isn't like that. These are arbitrary numbers. So I don't have this sort of understanding of naturalness here. This is one of my just overall gripes. Sorry about being grumpy today. If so, it must hold that... Okay. But this is implausible. Yeah, so here we're going to get an example for this sort of thing. Suppose that A, Alf's not stealing from Anne, Alf's stealing 10,000 from Anne, Alf stealing 50,000 from Anne is an alternative set, and that Anne's resulting lifetime well-being will be at 50, 48, and 44 respectively. Thus, DSA 2-4 implying that Alf stealing 10,000 from Anne would benefit her. Intuitively, though, this action would harm Anne rather than benefit her. Equally counterintuitive conclusions follow if we instead assume that the middle alternative in the alternative set with DSA 2-4 would be harmful and neutral. Consider that A star. The set A star, Alf's giving 50,000 Anne, Alf's giving 10,000 Anne, Alf's giving nothing to Anne, and assume again that Anne's resulting well-being levels would be 50, 48, and 44 respectively. Intuitively, Alf's giving 10,000 Anne would benefit her instead of harming her or being neutral. This verdict is perhaps especially plausible if we suppose that Alf is under no moral or legal obligation to give Anne any money. I just want you to consider that, look, maybe these people are billionaires, and this is wasting their time to throw $10,000 back and forth between them. Then all of this is sort of moot. It all depends on the setup here, and so a lot more has to go into this before it actually starts making... See, this is my point is that it's trying to play off what people normally feel is a lot of money, but you can't actually do that because you're assigning arbitrary numbers to them, and so these sorts of arbitrary numbers only appeal to the people the authors have in mind, and they think you have in mind too. But I don't personally think you can make a very strong philosophical claim on just that sort of example there. Now, I completely agree with their point here. That's not the same. I dislike the assigning of arbitrary numbers to well-being or other arbitrary numbers to philosophical concepts a lot of times. This is just my gripe. Hence, there are alternative sets A with DSA 2-4 in which the middle alternative would be harmful to S, and also such sets in which the middle alternative would be beneficial to S. This is incompatible with pure comparativism, and it does not help to assume that every alternative set has more than 3 members. The problem that we have highlighted appears also if we consider the status of, for example, the second best event in an alternative set with 4 or more members. We may thus conclude that harm and benefit are not determined solely by different profiles. In other words, pure comparativism should be rejected. Could the solution be to introduce an absolutist element so as to make harm and benefit a function of different profiles in conjunction with absolute well-being levels? Excuse me. This is not a promising suggestion. First, the two cases involving alpha and n indicate that an event E in an alternative set A might be beneficial, and another event E star in another alternative set A star harmful, even if A and A star have the same profile and involve the same absolute levels. If so, bringing in absolute levels obviously does not help. Yeah, I mean, these sorts of things, you can move all the stuff around. Second, on pain of violating adequacy condition 1, we must avoid the implication that every event resulting in sufficiently low or high lifetime well-being levels would be harmful or beneficial. For this reason, it is not easy to see what role there is for absolute levels to play. The only remotely plausible possibility, it seems, is to claim that the higher or lower the absolute well-being level that an event results in, the worse or better the event has to be in comparison with its alternatives for it to be harmful or beneficial. Thus, if an event results in a very high absolute well-being level, it is a harm only if there is a much better alternative. This is hardly true in general, however. Suppose that Dan lives a dismal life overall, but that he enjoys eating an ice cream cone that D gives to him. Surely D's giving the ice cream to Dan can benefit him, even if the resulting lifetime well-being for Dan is only a very slightly higher than the level in which alternative events would have resulted. Analogously, suppose that Eve has a wonderful life, but that Ernie on occasion comments critically on her new motorcycle. Surely Ernie's action might harm Eve, even if no alternative event would have resulted in a much higher lifetime well-being level for Eve. The upshot is that whether an event E would harm or benefit a person S does not depend only on absolute or comparative facts about the lifetime well-being level that S would have if E or its alternatives were to occur. That is, no well-being counterfactualist account of harm or benefit is acceptable. Conclusion. See, I'll try to remember my comment by the end. If I can't, so be it. We began by arguing that both absolutism and CCA face serious problems. We then went on to discuss three more complex versions of well-being counterfactualism, namely the best alternative account, the worst alternative account, and the average account. Unlike absolutism and CCA, these views allow that whether an event E is harmful or beneficial can depend not only on what would have happened, but also what could have happened if E had not occurred. Having found these views implausible, we presented a general argument to the effect that the difference profile for S of E's alternative set does not determine whether E is harmful or beneficial to S, either by itself or in conjunction with facts about absolute well-being levels. Because this conclusion is incompatible with well-being counterfactualist accounts of harm and benefit, such accounts ought to be rejected. If well-being counterfactualism is indeed rejected, what view of harm and benefit should we adopt instead? It is natural to think that we could find a more plausible theory by focusing on the causal rather than the merely counterfactual connections that obtain between an event and an agent's well-being level. However, while such causal theories of harm are popular, we think that this approach fails too for reasons that we discussed elsewhere. In our view, there is another possibility that at least deserves serious consideration, namely that no neat and informative theory of harm is true. This is not to imply that the concept of harm should be abandoned, as suggested by Bradley. After all, many philosophically important concepts lack neat and informative analyses. The point is just that many simple theories of harm and benefit face apparently devastating problems, which tend to remain even when those theories are complicated in various ways. In view of this, it might be time to question why we should expect there to be any true theory of harm and benefit. Okie dokie, that was a good paper. Basically, the overall strategy was to, if you're going to assign some sort of, how do you say this? Sort of like computational, some sort of additive or aggregate theory of like well-being, where you're getting more or less benefit in your overall well-being from different events, and then trying to figure out how that fits into the rest of your well-being. Those general sort of overarching schemes are bound to fail because of the issues that they raised, because they basically things do not neatly add up to a well-being, and nor easily subtract down to harm. And there's no easy way to just there's no absolute levels of like, okay, once you get over this, then you're in good well-being. Once you're below this level, you're it's a harmful thing. So we've got that. And so the question is, you've got these facts about lifetime well-being level. So this sort of this is exactly what it comes down to. What is the fact of a lifetime well-being? And we don't know. But the fact that these folks that the authors are arguing against think that there are sort of like facts and you can put numbers to these things, they think you can't do that, and then they showed why. And so even though I disagree with a lot of the argumentation, that's because this is what they're arguing against, and this is, in some sense, this is what people think, and so they're sort of using the methods against them. And so everything I was criticizing them is really not really against them. It'd just be against the sort of project that's going on here. And in that sense, I'm with the authors here. Okay, what else is nice about this paper? This was nicely argued and all considering pretty easy to read given the technical stuff that they built in. I mean, there's only one time like over here where I had to read formulas, and I appreciate that when reading out loud. I mean, I don't mind reading them when I'm not reading out loud, but reading formulas out loud is very hard to do. Okay, anything else? Any questions from the audience? Always feel free. Let's see. We've got these adequacy conditions. They're okay. I don't really love just calling stuff adequacy condition 1, adequacy condition 2. Maybe a little bit more descriptive. I would have liked just to keep them separate in my head, but they were really not a problem. Okay, cool. That's awesome. I mean, I also take suggestions, Adian. If you have things that, like, if you want me to read something in, like, politics, I'll read something in politics. I'll do that too. So let me know. And I mean, that's about it for now. I usually do one of these papers and then I'm tired. Sometimes I do other stuff, but one paper is enough, and also it's good just to cut it because it's just sort of one topic. But okay, that's it for now then. And if all else is no other questions, I guess I'll come back in a few days. I'm gonna try to get a more fixed schedule up soon, and okay, no problem. Yeah, I'll try to get a more fixed schedule up or decided upon. I'm not quite there yet. Alright, have a good night and stay safe out there, everyone. Please be careful. Have a great day. Oh, you're watching from Scotland? Yeah. Ooh, if you're in Europe, yeah, it's getting a little bit late. Okay. But yeah, that's it for now. Have a good night, folks. Bye-bye.